At my sister-in-law's wedding, my husband told the staff, "She's just the driver." My name wasn't even on the guest list. Then his mother leaned in and whispered, "Did you really think you were invited? How stupid." I held back my tears and smiled. "Then please give them this as a gift." It was a gift they would never forget. Autumn in Boston brings a sudden chill to the air, especially in the evening. When Emily Harper was returning home from her office, the red leaves on the street trees swayed in the wind, and cold rain struck her cheeks. Looking out the window of her financial firm on the 35th floor of a skyscraper, she felt the fatigue of another day of prolonged meetings. Her reputation as an accountant was excellent, and her clients trusted her deeply. That was her only consolation. "Emily, that was a wonderful proposal," her colleague Rachel said with a smile. Emily answered while gathering her documents and putting them in her bag. "Thank you. But that's it for today's work. One need to get home now." "Oh, right. Today is the Harper family dinner, isn't it?" At Rachel's words, Emily let out a small sigh. The Harper family, even after 8 years of marriage, she still didn't feel accepted as a member of that family. She got into a taxi and headed toward her home in an upscale residential area 8 years ago when she met James. He was a kind and thoughtful man. They married after a brief courtship, but after the wedding, his attitude gradually changed. When she arrived home, James wasn't back yet. It was typical. His family's real estate company always had important matters to handle, and he often returned home late at night. Emily took a shower and began preparing dinner. In the refrigerator was a casserole she had made yesterday. She warmed it in the microwave while checking her cell phone. There were no messages from James. The sound of the front door opening announced James's return. In the past, he would have hugged Emily when he got home and said, "You worked hard today." But now, he just passed through the living room and gave Emily a cold greeting. "I'm late. Is there anything to eat?" Emily answered with a smile. "Yes. I warmed up the casserole, and I made a salad too." James sat down at the table silently and began checking his phone. Emily tried to make conversation while serving the food. "How was work today?" "The usual. There was some trouble with the Bixby Tower project, but we managed to resolve it." James answered without taking his eyes off his phone. "I see. That's good," Emily said as she served food onto her plate. "By the way, about your sister's engagement party this weekend, is there anything I should bring?" James looked up for the first time. "Mum has arranged everything, so you don't need to bring anything. More importantly, Dad is bringing an important client after the party, so please try not to disrupt things." Emily paused momentarily with her chopsticks, but quickly composed herself. "Disrupt? What do you mean?" "I'm talking about the usual. Don't say strange things in front of my mother and family." "Strange things?" Emily frowned. "When have I ever said anything strange?" James pushed his plate away and stood up. "Last Sunday, when Dad was talking about his investments, you started discussing tax laws. That made Dad uncomfortable. Can you please refrain from such professional talk in front of my family?" Emily was speechless. She had only been trying to join the conversation. Moreover, as an accounting expert, she had just been providing accurate information. "James, that's enough." James waved his hand. "I'm tired. I'm going to check some papers in my study. Please clean up." Emily was left alone, staring at her half-eaten dinner. Outside the window, the rain grew stronger, and the sound of it hitting the glass echoed through the room. This wasn't the married life she had dreamed of 8 years ago. Her cell phone rang, and the screen showed it was from her mother-in-law, Margaret. Emily took a deep breath before answering. "Good evening, Margaret." "Emily, I need to talk to you about Sophie's engagement party." Margaret's voice was always haughty and condescending toward Emily. "What are you planning to wear? I prefer you avoid anything too flashy. This is Sophie's special day." Emily closed her eyes and kept her composure. "Of course, Margaret, I'll wear a subdued dress. And your parents won't be coming, right?" There was obvious relief in Margaret's voice. Emily's parents were middle-class teachers who had passed away 2 years ago. Their existence had always been treated as embarrassing by the Harper family. "No, they won't be coming," Emily answered matter-of-factly. "Good. Then I'll see you on Saturday. I've asked James to drive." After hanging up, Emily sank into the sofa, looking exhausted. When had her once love-filled marriage become so cold? She gazed at the rain outside the window, wondering what direction her life would take from here. The morning of the wedding day dawned with a rare, clear blue sky over Boston. Emily had risen early and was carefully applying her makeup. She sat at her dressing table, staring at her reflection in the mirror. There were faint signs of fatigue under her eyes. Over the past few weeks, she had tried several times to talk with James about improving their relationship, but he always ended the conversation with, "I'm busy right now. If you don't hurry up, we'll be late." James's voice echoed in the bedroom. He was already dressed in a new dark blue Armani suit, the high-quality fabric with emphasized shoulders seeming to flaunt his social status. Emily looked at him in the mirror, trying to recall the love she once felt for him. "I'll be ready soon," Emily answered, picking up a lilac-colored dress she had chosen from her wardrobe. It was a simple and elegant design, but she knew Margaret probably wouldn't like the color. Still, she wanted to maintain at least some of her own identity. James glanced at her chosen dress and frowned. "You're wearing that to the ceremony. Is there a problem?" "No, that's fine," he said, but his voice clearly conveyed his dissatisfaction. "It's just that Mom thought blue or green would be better." Emily took a quiet, deep breath. "This is the dress I've chosen, James, and I'd appreciate it if your mother would stop dictating my wardrobe." James checked his watch, changing the subject. "Just hurry up. We're leaving at 10:00. By the time Emily had finished dressing, James was already pacing restlessly downstairs. When she came down to the living room, James was looking at his phone instead of looking at her. "I'm ready." James looked up and saw her. For a moment, something seemed to flicker in his eyes, but it quickly disappeared. "Finally, let's go." As they got into James's luxury sedan, tension filled the car. He began driving in silence, and Emily turned her gaze to the scenery outside. The Boston cityscape passed by, and soon they entered the upscale Back Bay district. The Lingham Hotel was a historic building often used by the Harper family, and Sophie's wedding ceremony was scheduled to take place in the grand ballroom on the top floor. "James," Emily broke the silence. "Today could be a good opportunity to reset our relationship. It would be nice if we could enjoy some time together for a change." James was looking at his phone and didn't seem to be listening to half of what she said. He typed a message, sent it, and then responded. "Today is an important day for the family. Just don't think about unnecessary things and follow my instructions." Emily nodded, feeling a pain in her chest. "I understand, but can't we at least enjoy your sister's wedding together?" James gripped the steering wheel tightly. "Emily, today is a special day. He broke off and pretended to concentrate on the road. "Anyway, just follow my instructions when we get to the venue." Emily no longer understood her husband. Where had the caring man gone? She was mentally recalling James's suspicious behavior, lately frequent business trips, late returns home, and the way he never let go of his cell phone. She had been trying not to consider the worst possibility, but perhaps it was time to face reality. When the car stopped in front of the Lingham Hotel, a valet parking attendant came running up. James got out of the car and handed the keys to the valet. As Emily was about to exit the car, James suddenly grabbed her arm. "Emily, could you wait in the car for a bit?" She looked at her husband in surprise. "What are you saying?" "This is a wedding I was invited to." James looked around and spoke in a low voice. "Of course. I just thought I'd greet Mom and Sophie first, and then call you." Emily was hurt by his excuse, but wanted to avoid an argument in public. "James, I am your wife. I've put up with everything for 8 years, but today, at least, I want to be treated like family." James was clearly flustered, but perhaps sensing her determination, he reluctantly nodded. "All right, let's go together." Entering the luxurious hotel lobby, it was filled with people busy preparing for the wedding. The elegant space was further beautified by elaborate floral decorations and white ribbons. Emily was admiring the beauty when suddenly Margaret and Sophie came into her view. Sophie was dressed in a pre-wedding dress, standing alongside her mother. The two smiled when they saw James, but when they noticed Emily, their expressions clouded. Margaret was dressed in what looked like an expensive silk dress, with a necklace of large pearls around her neck. Her hair was perfectly styled, and she looked like a queen of high society. "James, you finally arrived." Margaret approached her son and kissed both his cheeks. Ignoring Emily, she continued, "Everyone's waiting. Sophie's makeup artist will arrive soon, and the time for the photo shoot is set. Sophie hugged James and called out in a sweet voice, "Big brother." She finally turned to Emily and gave her a cold smile. "Oh." Emily came too. James whispered something to his mother, and Margaret frowned as she looked at Emily. "I told you she would come." James's whisper was audible. Emily maintained her smile, feeling everyone's gaze. "Good morning, Margaret. Lovely dress." "Sophie, you look beautiful today," Margaret snorted, and Sophie returned a perfunctory smile. James was clearly uncomfortable. "Let's check in," Margaret said, leading the group. Emily followed behind James, feeling deeply anxious. The hallway leading to the grand ballroom of the Lingham Hotel was decorated with white orchids and soft satin ribbons. Emily admired the beauty while feeling anxiety spreading within her. Margaret and Sophie walked ahead with James standing between them. They occasionally whispered something and laughed together. Emily, following a few steps behind, symbolized her position in the family for the past 8 years. In the luxurious reception area, there was a long table decorated with large white floral arrangements, where 2 young women were checking the guest list. They wore elegant grey suits with small brooches bearing the initials of Sophie and her fiancé, Ethan, on their chests. Margaret led the way to the reception. "Harper," she said in a haughty tone. "I am the mother, Margaret Harper. This is the bride, Sophie, and her brother, James." One of the staff smiled and confirmed the name, saying, "Yes, Harper family, we've been expecting you." She marked the guest list and handed over the seating chart. Emily stepped forward and stood beside James. The receptionist looked up at her and asked with a gentle smile, "May I have your name, please?" Before Emily could open her mouth, James intervened. "Her," he said with a contemptuous smile. "Oh, she's just the driver." The moment those words echoed through the air, Emily's heart nearly stopped. She couldn't believe her ears. The driver. She had been this man's wife for 8 years. How many family events had she been pushed aside for? How much humiliation had she swallowed? But this time, it exceeded everything before. "James, what are you?" Emily's words were cut off. The receptionist looked confused and checked the guest list again. "I'm sorry, but the driver's name isn't on the list." Margaret and Sophie exchanged meaningful glances and smiled triumphantly. Emily stood frozen in place. Her name wasn't even on the invitation list. After 8 years of marriage, all the patience and effort, and yet she was treated as just a driver at her husband's sister's wedding. "James, what is this about?" Emily asked in a trembling voice. Tears were already forming in her eyes, but she was desperately holding them back. "I am your wife. Why isn't my name on the list?" James looked around, clearly uncomfortable. He tried to answer, but Margaret stepped in. "James, you're needed as Sophie's escort. It's almost time for the photo shoot," she said in a commanding tone. "Sophie, dear, come. The makeup artist is waiting." James gave Emily only a glance before moving to follow his mother and sister. Emily grabbed his arm. "James, you're going to leave like this without an explanation." He shook off her arm. "Later. This is family time now." Family. That word pierced Emily's heart. After 8 years, she was still not family. As James walked away with his mother and sister, Emily was left behind. The reception staff, clearly uncomfortable, began attending to other guests. Emily stood there, not knowing what to do. At that moment, Margaret came back. She gave some instructions to the staff and approached Emily. There was a cruel light in her eyes. "Emily, dear," Margaret called out in a sugary voice, but her eyes were as cold as ice. She leaned close to Emily's ear and whispered, "Did you think you'd be let in? How stupid." Emily shivered. Margaret's words were poisonous. "As if we would invite someone like you to the family's special day," Margaret continued. "You're just a temporary presence. I thought James would have realized that by now, but it's taking longer than expected." Something broke in Emily's heart, and at the same time, something else was born. A quiet anger and determination welled up from within her. All the past humiliations, the neglect, and today's final insult, everything crystallized within her and became a clear intention. Margaret was about to walk away with a triumphant expression, but Emily grabbed her arm. "Wait, Margaret." Margaret turned around, surprised. Emily had never shown such a strong attitude before. Emily opened her handbag and took out a quality envelope. On the cream-colored envelope, Sophie and Ethan's names were written in beautiful calligraphy. Emily took a deep breath and, holding back tears, smiled gently. Then please give them this. As a wedding gift. Margaret stared at the envelope with a puzzled expression. What is this? A wedding gift, Emily answered. Her voice was trembling, but there was a light of determination in her eyes. It's a special gift. Please make sure to give it to Sophie and Ethan. Margaret reluctantly took the envelope. Of course, I'll give it to them. But you should leave now. There's no place for you here. Emily nodded quietly, saying, That's right. There was no place for me here, but that's going to change from now on. Margaret couldn't understand the meaning of her words and stared suspiciously at the envelope. Emily adjusted her bag on her shoulder and turned elegantly. As she turned her back to Margaret, she left with a final message. I hope it's a lovely ceremony. Margaret, I hope it's a day you'll never forget. Emily left the reception area with dignified steps. Her back was straight, and her walk had a confidence she had never shown before. James peeked out from around the corner of the hallway and stared at her, but she didn't even glance at him. Having carried the humiliation and pain of 8 years, Emily's heart now knew no fear. A new strength had been born within her. She stepped into the hotel elevator and pressed the button. Just as the doors were closing, she saw James rushing down the hallway toward her. But it was too late. The doors closed, and the elevator began its descent. Emily gazed at her reflection in the elevator mirror. There were traces of tears on her face, but her eyes shone with determination. She took a deep breath and smiled slightly. This is the end, James, she whispered. But for you all, it's just the beginning. When the elevator arrived at the lobby floor, Emily walked calmly to the hotel bar. She sat at the bar counter and ordered a martini. Taking a sip, she pulled out her cell phone. The screen displayed the contact information of a lawyer she had been hesitating to call. Now her mind was made up. She would not turn back. As her finger tapped the phone number, her heart was surprisingly calm. Upstairs, Margaret would probably be opening the envelope by now. That special gift would shake the entire Harper family. Emily raised her glass and toasted herself. In the grand ballroom, wedding preparations were steadily progressing. Sophie was having her final makeup done in a dedicated bridal suite, and James was with her fiancé, Ethan, greeting guests. Margaret was making a final check of the venue decorations, occasionally glancing suspiciously at the cream-colored envelope in her hand. What are you looking at, Mom? Sophie asked, coming out of the suite. She was dressed in a luxurious wedding gown with a small diamond tiara sparkling in her hair. Oh, you look lovely. Margaret admired her daughter's appearance before holding up the envelope. This is a present from Emily, apparently. Emily. Sophie frowned. Where did she go? She left, of course, Margaret said triumphantly. But she left some gift. Let's open it. Margaret opened the envelope and took out the contents. The first thing she saw was a small card. She read it aloud to Sophie and Ethan. For the beginning of your new life. A gift of truth from Emily. A gift of truth. Sophie furrowed her brow. What does that mean? Margaret took out the rest of the contents from the envelope. There were several photographs and a bundle of documents. When she looked at the photos, her face suddenly turned pale. What is it, Mom? Sophie asked, noticing her mother's distress. Margaret was at a loss for words, and her hand holding the photos was trembling. The photo showed James and a young woman in an intimate setting. That woman this is Lauren, Sophie said in a thin voice, her face drained of color. Ethan's sister. There wasn't just one photo. Photo after photo showed James and Lauren entering a luxury hotel, dining at a restaurant, and several captured intimate moments between them. They were dated, with the oldest being from over a year ago. Since when? Margaret said in a trembling voice. James, since when have you been? But that was just the beginning. The envelope contained other documents as well, divorce papers signed by Emily, materials about a company she owned called Innovative Living, and most shockingly, internal documents showing that the Harper family real estate company had been in financial trouble for months. They were analyzed with Emily's expertise as an accountant, detailing how James and the Harper family had been maintaining the company through window dressing settlements. Margaret's face was contorted with fear. This is a lie, a fabrication. But her eyes were surprised at the detail and accuracy of the documents. Emily had access to the Harper family's financial situation, and as an accountant, she had seen through all the fraud. Mum, what's wrong? What happened? Sophie was increasingly confused. At that moment, Ethan approached. "Sophie, the ceremony is about to begin." He looked lovingly at his fiancée before noticing the photos in Margaret's hand. "What are those?" Margaret tried to hide the photos hurriedly, but it was too late. Ethan saw one of the photos, and his face froze. "Is this Lauren?" He took the photo in his hand, disbelieving. "With James." "Ethan, this is..." Sophie was at a loss for words. Ethan looked through the photos one after another, and his expression twisted with anger. "Since when?" His voice was low and had a dangerous resonance. "Since when has this been going on?" Margaret looked around for her son. "James!" she called desperately. James heard his mother's voice and hurried over. "What happened?" "The ceremony is about to start." Ethan thrust the photos in front of James's face with a trembling hand. "Explain this." The blood drained from James's face. He looked at the photos, then at the bundle of documents in Margaret's hand. Where did you get these?" "From Emily," Ethan said through gritted teeth. "From your wife, Emily." James was stunned. "She did this." "But how? What does it matter?" Ethan raised his voice. "You and my sister." He broke off and took a deep breath. Then, suddenly, he drove his fist into James's jaw. James stumbled backward from the impact and fell into a chair. Guests turned in surprise, and the venue fell silent. "The wedding is off," Ethan said coldly. He turned on his heel and left the venue. Sophie collapsed in tears, crying, "Ethan, wait!" as she chased after him. The sound of her luxurious wedding dress, dragging across the floor, echoed strangely in the silence. Amid the confusion, Margaret was examining the bundle of documents further. Her face grew even paler. "James, is it true about the company? Are we really on the verge of bankruptcy?" James stood up, wiping blood from his lip. "That can't be." But his eyes were filled with anxiety. He took his cell phone out of his pocket and began calling Emily. In the hotel lobby, guests were talking to each other in confusion. "Apparently, the ceremony has been cancelled." "What happened? Is there some problem with the Harper family?" Rumors spread quickly. Margaret clutched her expensive pearl necklace with trembling hands. She was going through the divorce papers. They detailed the division of shared property between James and Emily. Emily was demanding half of the profits from the Harper family's real estate company, and she had legal grounds to do so. "She knew everything," Margaret murmured. "Everything." James was desperately trying to call Emily's cell phone, but there was no response. His face was distorted with fear and anger. "Where is that woman?" he shouted. The venue had fallen into complete chaos. The high-end champagne tower had collapsed, and the wedding cake was left uncut. Sophie's crying could be heard from the hotel hallway. Meanwhile, Margaret was reading a line written on the last page of the divorce papers. "True family consists of people who respect you as an individual. This is my gift of truth." James returned to his mother. "What should we do?" His voice trembled with fear. She knew everything about the company, about Lauren, everything. Margaret looked at her son, her eyes mixed with anger and fear. "You brought this disaster upon us." The perfect world of the Harper family was about to collapse. Cheers and glasses clinked together, creating a pleasant sound in the private room of the upscale restaurant. Emily raised her champagne glass and smiled at her friends around her. Her face showed a confidence and tranquility that hadn't been seen before. To Emily Freeman's new journey, her close friend Rachel said, "And to the wonderful future of Freeman Financial Consulting." A year had passed since then. On the day she left the chaotic wedding, Emily went straight from the hotel to her lawyer's office. She had already made preparations evidence of James's infidelity, detailed analysis of the company's financial situation, and plans for the consulting company she had secretly been establishing. The divorce was settled, surprisingly quickly. James and his family had no choice. The evidence Emily had obtained meant that if they contested in court, it would bring further disgrace. Moreover, the financial state of the Harper family's real estate company was worse than she had indicated, and they were desperate to protect any assets they could. "Did you hear?" Rachel whispered from across the table. "James is apparently working at a used car dealership in Manhattan. I heard his company finally went bankrupt." "Is that so?" Emily shrugged. "I don't care about him anymore." It was true. In the first few weeks, there were sleepless nights filled with anger and hurt. But as time passed, she began to focus on her new life. With the assets gained from the divorce, she formally established Freeman Financial Consulting. Her approach of particularly supporting women entrepreneurs was highly valued by clients. And Margaret, another friend asked. Apparently, she's retreated to a relative's home in New Hampshire, Rachel answered. She's been completely ostracized from Boston's high society. And, Sophie, I heard she moved to Los Angeles, Emily said, trying to make a fresh start, I suppose. She gazed at the Boston night view spreading outside the window. This city, which had once oppressed her, had now become the stage of her success. She was no longer someone's appendage, but was living her own life. I wonder what real family is, Emily said quietly. It's not blood ties. It's not money. It's people who respect you as an individual. I think that's what true family is. The friends around the table nodded in agreement. They were all people who had supported Emily during her difficult times. Now, then, Emily raised her glass again, a toast to the future, to all our futures. Outside the window, spring stars were beginning to shine. A new season, a new beginning. Emily smiled. There were no more tears in her eyes.